right now. So we'll probably have some people join this online events later than on the hour. We always have this posted to our YouTube channel by the end of the week. So we will post this to our YouTube channel by the end of the week, and which is today, and also send out a link to all of the participants who registered. So if you only catch a portion of this, or if you have a coworker that only catches a portion of this, it'll be available in that format. So, but we're going to go ahead and jump on in. You know, I think this is the first time we've done one of these online events on a Friday. We've done them on a Wednesdays in the past. We know there's a long weekend coming up, but you know, we're hoping we get a good group in, and are excited to kind of talk about today's topic. So today we're going to be talking about auditing a supplier's billings prior to renewal. And I've actually got here with me Ryan Worthen. So I'll do an introduction to myself, and I'll have Ryan introduce himself as well. And this is a topic that Ryan and I, before we jump in, have really been discussing for a number of years now around the audit work we perform, and specifically, you know, the value of the timing of performing a contract compliance review when you're making the big decisions about vendor renewal, RFP, and potential vendor replacement. So I only give that context as, you know, this is something that Ryan and I have put together, you know, over the last couple of weeks from a content perspective, but it's something that we've been discussing and kind of forming mentally for a number of years, because we've really seen the value that this type of a approach or mindset can take. So my name is Ben Evans. I'm the president of Auditing Solutions. I live out here in Gilbert, Arizona. I've been with Auditing for about 5 years, father to 3 little girls, CPA, and have been doing recovery audit work for, you know, a little over a decade. So Ryan, do you want to give a quick introduction? Ryan's going to be doing most of the heavy lifting today, and I'll just kind of be prompting some discussion with him.
Yeah, I'd love to. Good morning, Ben, and good morning, everyone that's joining us. My name is Ryan Worthen, Managing Director in the Contract Compliance Group of Auditing. I also live in the you know, the greater Phoenix area here in Gilbert. It's already hitting 106, so it's already getting super hot down here. I've got a wife and 4 kids that just got out of school for summer, so we're just getting ready for summer down here. My background is kind of heavy in recovery audit for 8-9 years, but before that, a lot of focus in you know, forensic accounting and you know, verification of accuracy of financial transactions and that kind of thing. So happy to be here today, Ben.
Great. Well, I'm going to quickly turn it over to Ryan. And again, I imagine, you know, we've spent a lot less time prepping this discussion today than we have talking about it, as I've already said a couple of times. And so, you know, I imagine as Ryan goes through the slides, we'll try to have kind of a back and forth discussion to make sure we're kind of bringing all the insights to the table that we've kind of, we feel we've come to over the last couple of years on this topic. So with that, Ryan, I'm going to put the ball in your hands. Go ahead.
Awesome. Super passionate about this topic. Really enjoyed talking about it. So looking forward to the conversation today. We do, you know, a lot of work for a lot of different clients, and sometimes the timing works out where, you know, the feedback we're giving from, you know, an audit, right? Looking at audit results and some of those observations and learnings that come out of the audit work, they are timed around, you know, an RFP, and the timing can be awesome there. And so, you know, as we look at the reason RFPs come about, just for a tiny bit of background here, we have a very wide range of you know, different kinds of backgrounds as far as attendees that signed up for this. So you know, RFP is obviously a request for proposal, going through a process of, you know, of saying, hey, am I going to stick with my current vendor, or am I going to look at some of these other vendors? And the RFP is really, you know, the process is designed to help a procurement organization look at, you know, the different offerings from, you know, 3 or 4 potential vendors that could meet that procurement organization's needs for the service or product being sought out. And so they can come about for a variety of reasons. Obviously, a lot of companies have a recurring RFP schedule for different, you know, services and products. Vendor performance issues can obviously lead to an RFP, you know, independent of any audit work or anything else. You know, obviously business is being is happening all the time, and so those can come out. Hey, let's do an RFP here. We're a little concerned about some things, or something like that. New scope needs can also come up that say, hey, we need to RFP this. We've got stores in 5 different states now. We've got to figure out for this service or products what companies might be able to service us better as we grow. For example, new scope there, or merger or acquisition activity. We also see a lot where there's, especially over the past couple of years, there's been a heightened number of mergers or acquisitions taking place, and as we look at that, a lot of different RFPs come out as they look to consolidate organizations or bring them together. So some of the key points for an RFP. And I'm going to focus on the second bullet point the most here, but a clear statement of services, products being sought, including the scope, that is being looked at. The second bullet point, specific instructions for the proposal. As we've helped clients here a little bit, this is the most important part. Perspective for RFP is designing the RFP in a way where there's enough specificity to get to where oranges are not being compared with apples, are not being compared with bananas, because if the RFP is pretty loose in language, the different kinds of proposals you get back, they can be varied enough. They can actually be very, very challenging to compare. Apples to apples, and so the challenge in this area is trying to make sure that the RFP is written in a way by the procurement group where it's specific enough that the responses you receive are at least reasonably comparable. They're not going to be identical, but reasonably comparable, so that you're closer to comparing oranges to oranges there. And then obviously a timeline for the RFP process, just outlining all the different steps of, hey, we need the responses by this date, and so on, with some some commitment on the decision timeline on the client side as well. So just a little background for the RFP process for those who might not be super familiar with what's going on there.
And just to take
go ahead.
Just to take a step back on this too. I mean, so we're really wanting to focus on RFPs where a renewal is in this discussion, where a renewal is taking place. I mean, there is an incumbent vendor, so you're not looking for new services or a new product that you haven't had in the past, but someone has been doing it for some organization or a group of organizations have been performing this work for you for some period of time. And Ryan will jump into this now, but a little bit of spoiler. What we're trying to say is, let's leverage that. Let's leverage the actual historical, record as we look at how we're going to manage, execute, and ultimately complete the upcoming RFP, or not. I mean, whether you maybe after reviewing the historical record, you decide to just renew the vendor, or take another route. But this is really focused on an RFP in the context of a renewal where an incumbent vendor or multiple incumbent vendors are already there.
Yeah, an analogy I thought of, Ben, you love your sports analogies. What I thought of is going through the trading season where all these players are being traded back and forth from team to team, and going into an RFP would kind of be like going into this trading exercise where you're looking at all these different potential players without really knowing enough about the current players on your team. You know what I mean? And yes. This is an opportunity as far as an incumbent to really know, the vendors or players, if you will, that are currently on your team, so that you can really compare those adequately to, the other players that you're considering, bringing on your team or trading or whatever.
I love that analogy. It's almost like Moneyball, right? So we're wanting to restate what you just said. We're wanting to look at the historical performance of the players in the last couple of seasons to determine what the best route and method is to take moving forward in RFP.
Exactly. So like Ben said, this is focused on situations where there's an incumbent, right? So this is not a new service. You've had this vendor for a while. and you're looking at, whatever's happening, you're looking at saying, hey, do we want to stay with this vendor or potentially, choose a new vendor? And there's some real value in having audit work performed at that time, because it can give some really, deep, unique insights into what's happening with that current vendor before other vendors are even being considered, right? Kind of before the RFP. So the timing of this work, just so everyone understands, the timing is just before the RFP, so that any results or observations coming out of the audit work are known to the procurement group and can be considered at that time, right? And a few of the key observations that we've had some really cool opportunity to share with clients over the past little while are kind of bullet pointed here. The first, and we'll go into detail on each of these, but the first, accuracy of billings over the past 3 years. We do look at getting right into the data, deep billing data, as well as a comparison to the contracts. We look to assess accuracy of the billings that have been going on, right? Obviously a super important step, because the RFP is going to include some real negotiation regarding different terms and stuff like that. And this at least gives visibility into, hey, has this incumbent been adhering to the terms that have already been in place before any conversations happen on what the future looks like as far as terms. The second bullet point here, any gaps or gray areas in current contracts. We work with very large world well, despite some across areas where the contract doesn't specifically bill of a certain item. And we'll go through some examples of that. We call that Maverick Spend. And we try and provide our clients visibility into, hey, how is this incumbent vendor handling Maverick Spend when technically no contract language is governing how those items would be billed to the client. The third bullet point here is a general insight into the willingness to be transparent. As we do see, some level of variation, if you will, to a supplier willingness to, cooperate and be transparent, and comply with the request for different data and documentation. Then the client has that understanding, and get that feedback from the audit process. And the last one is adherence to some of the SLAs that are in the contract. And we'll go into some examples with that as well. I just see a note in the chat, Ben. Are we having any audio issues? Someone else is, or someone's kind of having it cut in and out a little bit. Are you hearing a problem?
Yes, we are. Yeah, I just confirmed with Daniel as well on our IT team. So you're cutting in and out a little bit. Maybe I'm trying to think if it makes sense for you to dial back in, or maybe just see if it continues to be better.
Okay.
You're good now. Let's keep going. Let's keep going because it's clear for the last little bit, but it was touch and go for a minute.
Okay. No, I appreciate people's feedback in the chat as well, letting us know. I appreciate that very much. The first area is accuracy of billings over the past 3 years. This is where we're doing a full billing compliance audit for the client, and we're able to bring back observations of like, hey, over the past 3 years, they've billed you for all these different items, and there's been differing levels of compliance, for example, right? Or the feedback could come back, hey, we measured all the different items they're billing you for, with regard to accuracy of quantity and accuracy of pricing, and they're spot on, right? And if that's the feedback the client gets, the client can go into that RFP conversation with a lot of comfort regarding how things have been handled in the past by the incumbent vendor.
Great. Go ahead and click to the next one.
Perfect. So a couple examples here. Most of the examples we included in here, just to, for simplicity's sake, are focused on facility maintenance. We do a lot of facility maintenance work for a lot of our clients, and so the examples are kind of focused there. We could have pulled examples from from any any line of work, but most of the examples are kind of focused on that. And so we perform testing on the accuracy of labor hours, for example, when we have a situation where time and material billings are part of the relationship, right? We're looking for accuracy of those hours. Are the hours billed aligned with the hours the technician actually spent on site, or are there gaps there, right? And as we get into it, we go right to the root cause, so we can help our client have feedback regarding what is exactly happening. And sometimes this can lead to better contract language as well. So as we walk through here, we'll talk through some of these examples. We might observe that there's billing for travel time. So we might observe, hey, the time spent on site was not as much as the time our client was billed for. And as we get into the detail and documentation, we might see that a particular vendor is billing for travel time. And maybe travel time is prohibited per the contract, or maybe the contract doesn't specifically address travel time, for example. But that feedback coming to the client can allow the client to adjust or be more specific with that language on a go-forward basis to say, hey, just to be clear, if we're paying you a trip charge, for example, we do not expect to see travel time being billed to us in addition to the time spent on site and the trip charge. A second example there is we see 1 hour minimums sometimes, right? Some contracts have them, some contracts don't. There's always, obviously other things that come into play there. At times we'll see a 1 hour minimum being billed to our client when the contract doesn't support the 1 hour minimum. So, if you're there 15 minutes, you don't get to bill to the full hour, depending on the contract again. And giving that feedback to the client allows the client to be more specific in their RFP, the way they write and construct the RFP, and what they're asking the incumbent or new vendors to do as they look to make a decision going forward on what vendor would be part of this. The third one here, as far as an example, is billing estimated or rounded labor hours. We do see this sometimes in our audit work where, there'll be a process where the vendor will have to estimate, hey, I think it's going to take 30 hours to do XYZ, right? And then there'll be an expectation to bill the actual, but sometimes, the way the billing comes across, it'll just be, beyond the estimated number of hours. And if we observe this, it allows our client to understand what's going on. It allows our client to potentially adjust or be more specific with the contract language going forward, to make sure there's extreme clarity between the parties on what hour metric would actually be included in the billings to the client going forward.
Yeah, and just kind of taking a context step back here, when we're talking about accuracy in renewal, going back to the sports analogy, what we're really wanting to make sure here is, I think, is procurement professionals, which I think is probably the largest audience that we have registering for this conference, although there's quite a bit of finance. When you're going into a new RFP or you're going into a new contract, a lot of time is spent on the future, right? Like trying to figure out what things are going to look like. And I think what our insight is, after doing hundreds if not thousands of these contract compliance supplier reviews, is that more time needs to be spent looking at what did happen, because you can go out and, in these examples that Ryan's just walked through, you can go out and negotiate the absolute best travel rate, the best language around the tracking of time. Maybe you get it to an 8-hour increment as opposed to a half-hour increment, and you feel like that's going to save your company some money. And as a procurement professional, you've now created future value. But if no one's following those contracts, then the value you're creating is not ever coming to be. And so, as Ryan's walking through these accuracy examples, what I really want to kind of highlight is procurement professionals, by performing these audits prior to doing the renewal process and the RFP process, you're able to actually figure out, hey, what value that I already have negotiated am I actually getting, right? Like what am I getting from what I've already, put the effort in? And then once, you understand that, you can kind of plug some of those holes and put things in place to make sure that it's going to move forward. Then you can kind of focus on, well, where can I negotiate new value, whether that's through your rate reduction or through an expansion of services or getting, value add from your vendors. I think too often procurement professionals are stuck in a position where they kind of have to assume that everything that they've currently negotiated is coming through as it's supposed to, which is often not the case. Any color to that, Ryan? Is that anything to add to that?
That's perfect. That's perfect. I mean, even a simple labor rate example, if we look at it, if a procurement professional goes in and really, fights on rate and gets the rate down from, say 85 down to 81, right? The meaning of that effort by the procurement professional can certainly be undermined if they're not billing to actual labor hours anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, great. I will move to the next example.
Perfect. Overtime rates. We do a lot of work around this space as we look at, a time and material vendor as well. Look to assess, hey, are they using the overtime / emergency / holiday rates in the way we would have expected, right? And then if there's instances where they might not be, we look to really understand why. And some of the examples here, as far as potential errors we might observe in this space, slash root causes we see, billing for overtime, emergency, or holiday rates during normal business hours. We do see this sometimes, right? And so that feedback can really be empowering to the procurement organization, understanding, hey, we might need to be more specific in defining when these rates can be applicable. And we do see a large variation across our clients in the level of specificity they have in their contract templates around this topic in particular. Some have such a level of specificity to say, hey, from this hour, from like 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. We are billed normal rates no matter what, unless it's like a documented holiday. I mean, there's a lot of specificity in some of them, and some just have the rates without any governing language that would help guide when those rates could be utilized. The second bullet point here, billing of overtime rates based on the technician being over 40 hours a week. We do see sometimes where there'll be a tie in the vendor's billing system to the rates they're billing clients. And it's an inappropriate tie, because the technician hitting 40 hours does not mean that the rate applicable to that client would be an overtime rate. For example, if the technician worked late on Monday, Tuesday for a different customer that you've never heard of, not you, right? And then on Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock they hit their 40 hours. The rate should not adjust to an overtime rate based on that. Right. And so there's, obviously some learnings that can come out of an observation like that. The third bullet point here, billing of overtime rates when the work order didn't warrant emergency or after hour response. A lot of our customers have a lot of specificity in the way that work orders are dispatched, for service. And it includes like, a designation of a severity level, severity level 1, severity level 2, severity level 3, and looking at the specific parameters of, are they only responding in such a way that they would warrant an overtime or emergency rate when the severity level warrants that response. For example, if some of our customers have their lowest severity level would have a 1 or 2 week turnaround, meaning, hey, just do it when you can, not a big deal. It's something that's been broken for a while, just fix it when you can, kind of communication, right, with that severity level. And as it comes across, sometimes we'll see the vendor just shoot somebody out there that night and fixes it, and they do it at a very expensive rate, right? And so that kind of feedback can also be empowering to the procurement organization to see, hey, are these rates that are meant to protect us only when they're absolutely needed, are they being utilized at those times, or are they potentially being utilized more often than they should?
Okay, I'm going to great example there. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. No color to add on this one. Go ahead.
You're good. You're good. This one I'd say is probably our biggest topic for today, you guys. This is the Maverick Spend topic. This is where, you know, there are more times than we might expect where we observe that some, you know, area of the billing relationship is ungoverned by current contracts. And we have some examples here. We'll get into them, but we call this Maverick Spend. You know what it is, and it's not surprising that it happens from the vendor side. I mean, the vendor is definitely not, you know, generally motivated to come forward and call out that there's areas that should be further negotiated and clarified. And so there are times where we end up with, you know, many millions of dollars being transacted that are technically not governed by any clause in the contract. And we'll go through a couple of examples here, but from a timing of a pre-renewal audit, considering, you know, when the information would actually be helpful, the timing of this is super helpful to, you know, to clients when it comes out right before the RFP, because they can include these areas that have, you know, historically been ungoverned. They can include these areas in the RFP instructions as items that need specific pricing. So they can ask for, hey, what's your markup on this? Or how would you bill me this item? Where historically, there's not been governing language on those, on those areas, those Maverick Spend areas.
Yeah, and this is, as Ryan said, a really big area. So, you know, in performing our work, you know, we're an auditing company. Specifically, we're talking about contract compliance audits. It is almost the rule that we will see an initial contract signed with a vendor, or a renewal, a second renewal, even a third renewal that's taken place over the course of many years. And in that entire process, 40, 50, 60% of the spend is ungoverned, meaning that there's no clear guidelines about what the vendor needs to do when billing. There might be, you know, materials that have no price list or no markup expectation, or really no pricing controls, even though the other 40%, right? The other 40% of the spend does have very specific instructions. And again, I think this comes back to, you know, procurement professionals are, they're busy. They've got a lot of stuff to be doing, and they're really focused on, you know, the next RFP, what's happening in the future. And there's not normally the bandwidth for a procurement professional to look at it and say, okay, you know, when we initially signed the agreement, the scope of what they were going to be providing was, you know, A through F, but now it's grown to be G through X. Time to put that to the contract. Well, these audits, performing an audit prior to the renewal process, prior to having the RFP, you know, part of the reporting that comes back from us as an auditing firm, in addition to the accuracy stuff we just talked about, is going to be able to say, hey, this is your area of Maverick Spend, like Ryan just called it. You know, the areas where spend is ungoverned. And that generally happens. There's a lot of reasons it happens, but the most common reason it happens is because things change, right? The only thing that never changes is that things will change, right? And so when the initial contract's signed, you know, there's an expectation that there's going to be a certain amount of work, and then time passes and it changes into something totally different, and it never gets picked up. Suddenly you have this big master services agreement that doesn't really, you know, fit the relationship. An audit is, I can't think of a better mechanism for a large strategic supplier. I can't think of a better mechanism than an audit to be able to identify exactly where those are, and to have them, you know, line itemed out to the most detailed point. And Ryan's got some examples he's going to walk through on this, but this is a huge, I mean, Ryan said it, but this is the huge point to hit home on.
It is.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yes, and we break down the spend. So as we do an audit, we're looking at all the billings, right? And we're breaking down the spend by categories, making sure we understand, you know, how much spend is in each category. And as we do that, sometimes we'll find a category, you know, unaddressed by the contract. So, you know, it's a Maverick Spend category. And sometimes as we're sharing that back with the client will be kind of shocked how big that category has grown to. They're like, whoa, that's a really big category, bigger than we thought. Freight is an easy example of that. We've had a lot of instances, Ben and I over the years. I'm thinking of some of different site visits we've done, even where freight has been a really big topic, and it was one the client didn't recognize that much money was kind of going back and forth, in the freight space, and it was completely ungoverned by the contract. And so when you have an item like freight completely unaddressed by the contract, it's really just a kind of a trust thing of like, we'll just kind of let the vendor do what they think is prudent. And to be totally frank, we've seen crazy differences in how vendors choose to handle freight, for example, when there's not governing language controlling how freight would be built. We've seen very, very high markup rates sometimes. We've seen pass-through sometimes. We've seen an estimated kind of flat fee per item that's just kind of like, hey, here's our best guess is how to handle freight because we don't track it very well or whatever. We've seen a variety of ways that can be handled. But the big call out here is obviously knowing this, right? The timing of the knowledge, knowing this right before a renewal allows for the inclusion of freight as a specific item, saying, hey, we know freight's going to be part of this relationship. It has been, it will be. Please include in your RFP how you would plan to bill us for freight. And then there can be clarity and there can be a provision that can be audited to in the future to make sure the client has control over how that amount is handled. Any other comments on freight, Ben? I know it's a big one. We've covered that so much over the years in different instances.
No, not on freight, but just to restate that last sentence you said, which I think is really critical. We find out that there is something not governed in freight. Now we're able, and this is the whole point of today's discussion, now we're able to put that into the RFP, put it into the RFP process so that when we get back information, we know we're comparing apples to apples. Because if we don't know that, and we have, Ben Company and Ryan Company as potential vendors, Ben Company might quote a lower rate on a product because I know I'm going to be able to take you to the cleaners on freight. And Ryan Company might have a slightly higher product, but has a more reasonable approach to freight. So on paper in the RFP, if you don't perform this work, right? If you don't perform this work, Ben Company looks better because he has a lower price. But by doing this work and identifying, hey, freight's an issue. This is an area of Maverick Spend. Now it's in the RFP and they have to define how they're going to do freight. Well, now when you stack up Ben Company and Ryan Company side by side, you're going to see that ultimately Ryan Company is cheaper. And that's an insight, that I think it's very hard to get without performing an audit first, without really seeing how things have been operating and, where things haven't been governed.
Absolutely. This second one we've had a lot of encounters with over the past 12 months. This second area here, as far as examples, incomplete material price list. This one isn't so specific to facilities, although we have seen it, in the past few months on a couple of facilities projects as well. But we see this in a lot of different areas where there's a price list, right? So there'll be a master services agreement. There'll be a reference to like an SOW or an exhibit that has a price list, and sometimes that price list is pretty simple. It might only have 10 or 15 items on it, and it might date back. The list of items might date back to the beginning of the relationship 5 or 7 or 8 years ago, and it really hasn't been updated besides just adjusting those prices a little bit. And the question obviously comes in: what should be done on the items that are not on that material spend list? For example, just a random heating air conditioning example, because I have a background actually doing heating air conditioning through college, so I guess it's close to me, easy example for me to do. But there's so many different sizes of items that could be on a price list for like a compressor that goes into an air conditioning unit, right? There could be so many different kinds and sizes of that compressor that a price list probably doesn't adequately hit on how every one of those should be built. So generally what we see is kind of a general price on a price list, but really it's not being adhered to very well because there's huge differences in the in what items are being provided. And so all the items that are not specified on the price list, well, they become part of that Maverick Spend bucket. And so visibility into that going into the RFP process, we'll kind of give feedback to the client and say, hey, 40% or 70% or whatever percentage of the materials are not currently governed by the contract language because they're not on the price list, for example. That feedback helps the procurement organization say, okay, what are we going to do on materials? Are we going to try and run with a price list structure going forward, where we try and build out the price list in a more robust way where we can use a price list structure? Or do we consider something different? Do we consider a cost plus, kind of structure or something different so that we're not leaving a large portion of materials ungoverned? And just like the freight, we've encountered this on so many different projects, and we've seen the handling of these materials vary substantially. We've seen a lot of them that will try and just match something close in the price list in a way that honestly seems pretty fair to the client. But we've seen some of them where there's a very notable excessive markup applied when the contract doesn't happen to govern those specific items. And so that timely feedback to the client becomes crucial as they're structuring the instructions for the RFP to send out to the incumbent as well as the new prospective vendors, so they can all be responding, understanding there's not going to be a Maverick area and spend. All materials will be covered by contract language. A third bullet point here: subcontracted work, very similar in nature to the top two. Generally, contracts will have language regarding whether subcontracted work is even allowable under that relationship. If it's allowable, hopefully it has some language regarding how that would be billed. And subcontractor work can be billed a variety of ways, right? It can be billed, kind of as if the vendor did the work themselves, right? Based on actual labor hours and following those material cost provisions and that kind of thing. Or as we often see, it can be based on a markup percentage. Hey, anything subcontracted gets a 10% markup or whatever expectation they agree to. Sometimes what we see in this space is, at least based on the contracts we're seeing and the conversations we're having, we'll see that initially, as the relationship was kicked off, they didn't expect subcontracted work to be any meaningful portion of that relationship. And so they didn't really address it in the contract. And 5 years later, that growing client has added 10 different states to the supplier's region of coverage, if you will. And all of a sudden, that supplier is subcontracting a lot of stuff because they're handling work across so many different areas. They don't have their actual their own technicians. And subcontracted work is all of a sudden, over a few years, without really a knowledge to procurement, if you will, it's become a huge part of the relationship. But the contract still doesn't address it as such. And so the feedback from the audit would very promptly call out, hey, we have a growing area of spend here that is subcontracted that needs contract language. It needs to be included as a separate line item in the RFP, so that everyone responding will be able to be clear about their intentions of how they're going to bill you when they subcontract the work and don't self-perform that work.
Perfect. Great.
Awesome. A couple more areas here to cover. Definitely those first two are huge. And I'd say the majority of the time, the client feedback we get are, where clients are like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I knew that. I'm so glad the timing of this audit was such that we could learn this. I'd say most of those fall into those first two buckets. And, the general accuracy of billings. Hey, is the incumbent following actual contract terms? And then the Maverick Spend concept, right? The concept that there could be notable portions of spend that aren't even addressed in current contracts, and might not be addressed going forward unless the RFP kind of specifies those and calls those out and makes some corrections there. These last two areas, we have had some cool feedback in the past 6 months or so on these two areas. This one is just an insight into the willingness to be transparent. Vendors, definitely don't love the concept of an audit, and none of us do. I mean, it's the same as if the IRS sends us an audit notice. None of us are excited. I mean, they totally understand. Never would criticize a vendor for not being excited about it. Totally. But there are differing levels of cooperation and response we see, and by and large, a lot of vendors are great in this area, right? Definitely giving credit to the vendors. There's so many that have been so great to work with, but occasionally a vendor will be a lot more obstinate or a lot more strategic in trying to exclude data fields we need or something like that, and there's some real learnings that the client can take out of that as far as kind of assessing and considering the incumbent's current behavior, as far as level of transparency and willingness to be a great partner going forward as things are happening in the overall business relationship. And so we've had some instances where on the positive side, the way the vendor worked with us and the way that transparency came out, it gave the vendor a huge leg up as the incumbent, because all of a sudden the client's looking at this and saying, hey, I know this vendor. They just went through an audit. They gave us everything. They worked with us in this crazy way. Would I really want to trade this vendor that I kind of know so well now, and in such a transparent way, with a vendor that I don't know yet, right? And there's been some real wins on the vendor side, I think, as far as that goes. There's also been a few times where the clients did have to become aware of us never receiving the data we would have needed, and there being some lack of transparency. These aren't the norm, but it happens sometimes, and the client definitely would be considering that and is appreciative of having that information as they're going to an RFP and trying to consider who do we want to work with in the future. Any other comments on that one, Ben?
No, I think it's a good call out. I mean, I think, the big key on the transparency, I guess we'll like the slide. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction too. So the big key on the transparency is we're not looking, at whether or not they like to have an audit, but, really, are there certain things that they are not wanting to be transparent about that are concerning? Are there components of their billings or commitments they've made, terms you've negotiated as a procurement or a finance professional that they don't want to give you visibility into because they fear you may not like what you see?
Absolutely. And then the last area we'll cover today real quick, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to join us right before our Memorial Day holiday, adherence to service level agreements. A lot of these contracts do have expectations, right? KPIs or SLAs that are outlined there to kind of govern the vendor's behavior. A lot of these aren't focused on the financial side of things as much as the way the business is operating day to day. But feedback on how the vendor is complying with these can be very, very helpful as as the procurement organization is considering, again, do we want to move forward with the incumbent or do we want to make a trade or a change here as far as vendor? I think I had a couple of examples on this one, Ben. Yeah, so a couple of things we've seen recently, just as far as a couple of easy examples, response times, right? The business teams we work with, the clients, they generally have a feel for level of compliance, I would say, on the SLA, a general feel like, I feel like, I mean, I'm not hearing a lot of complaints from store managers. I feel like they're getting there, kind of reasonably. But we're able to get into all the data over the past 3 years and bring back some key statistics for our clients, through the audit process to say, hey, they actually were only on time 10% of the time. Or, conversely, this vendor's on time like 94% of the time. I mean, whatever the data is, right? But that feedback can really be helpful to the client at that time as they're trying to make those key decisions on a go forward basis. And another just easy example on the facility side, and this goes back to labor hour accuracy. A lot of clients have different IVR, or now it's more GPS based clock in, clock out systems, right? Well, they'll have a GPS system and a geofence, and they'll require usage of that so that they have some reasonable comfort regarding when the tech's there, when the tech's not there, that kind of thing. And so it allows for the verification that, hey, we're only paying for when the tech was actually there. But usage of that system is not perfect, right? It's technology usage wouldn't be perfect, but we're able to come back with some metrics on, hey, here's what we're seeing as far as, are they using it as as well as would be expected? Are they in the 90% range of compliance? Where they're at, we can kind of report that to the client, and the client can make some decisions regarding what their expectations are, and they may even, with that feedback, the client may even choose to put in the go forward contract some financial penalties if compliance isn't what they expect. If they're finding, hey, this system we paid so much money for and put and have put so many resources into to put in place is only being used by this vendor 25% of the time, right? And if that's the feedback, they can get more serious about saying, hey, we need to double down on the usage of the system. We've invested a lot in it. We need the feedback from it. And so they can, get some more serious compliance by potentially considering to, put some financial incentives or penalties, the way you want to look at it, to incentivize better future compliance.
Great. All right, so I think that's the end of the discussion. I do want to do a kind of a quick recap just on kind of what the overall drive here or takeaway is from this discussion. So, big picture, we're an audit firm. We're not procurement or finance professionals ourselves. We've done a lot of this work, and really the culmination of performing a lot of this work has had us identify that there's a pattern of feedback we're getting from our clients. And when often, as Ryan has said, if an audit's performed right before a renewal, the feedback we're getting from the client is, man, that was perfect timing. That was really nice. We're glad that worked out well. If it's performed after a renewal, either close or even a year later, the feedback is, I wish I would have known, or I wish we would have done this a year ago. I wish we would have done this 6 months ago. So for those of you who are performing audits already, either within your organization or with a third-party firm, I would say consider to line up your timing, especially with your key strategic suppliers, at the point where it's happening prior to the renewal decision. So making, prior to either renewing the vendor or putting the work up for RFP. If you're not performing this work at all, which is probably the majority of the people who are participating in this event today, or who will watch this video in the future on the YouTube channel, consider doing these audits on some strategic accounts, because I think it was Jason Henbest at Walmart. He's one of our clients, and in a different video, you can find it up on our website. He made the comment, "You don't know what you don't know," and that's okay sometimes. Like, you're not going to know everything, and you're not going to be able to catch everything with some of your smaller or moderately sized suppliers. But when you do have a key relationship that has a significant amount of spend that is more core to the operations of your company, it makes sense to know as much as you can. And these there's a reason that audit clauses are traditionally put into these master services agreements and these master agreements, and it's because it's a best practice. So we don't want this to be a sales pitch, so we're not necessarily trying to drive home audit tech solutions only on this topic. But if you do ever have any questions about this process, whether you want to perform it internally or if you want to perform the work with an outside firm, please reach out. We'd be happy to answer questions regardless. And appreciate all of you. And we'll have this link sent out within the next, probably next day or so. So we'll send a link, and so you can share this amazing content with the people you work with. So Ryan, anything else to add as we close this up?
The only thought that came to mind, Ben, is calling out, the just highlighting the you don't know what you don't know. It brought back an experience from a few years ago. We did an audit, and we audited one of their oldest relationships. It was a 35-40 year relationship. They've been doing business forever, and we identified a Maverick area of spend. and the way the client would have expected that Maverick area to be handled versus the way the the vendor had been handling that Maverick area spend was very different. And so just calling out the timing of this, that this audit work, whether performed internally or whoever does it, even on some of those relationships that there might be a view, hey, we've been doing this forever. There still can be some great knowledge that comes out of kind of peeking under the hood and getting into the details and making sure there's some clarity regarding all the areas of the spend and the way things are being handled.
Absolutely. Great. Well, everyone out there, have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully you're able to get out and kind of remember the purpose of the day and spend some time with family and loved ones. And we haven't yet set our online event for next month, but should be set probably within the next 7 days. So appreciate everyone who participated live, and those who are listening to this in the future. Appreciate you as well. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. Bye.